Sorry about that. Okay, so I think we'll kick off now. Afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk to you for about 20 minutes or so about starting to run agile projects in organizations that are traditionally used to more traditional, sometimes called waterfall techniques. So I'll talk to you for about 20 minutes or so, and if I don't overrun too much, then there'll be an opportunity to ask some questions at the end. And I'm told we've got a hashtag for this, waterfall to agile. Okay, so I think probably the thing I would start by saying is that one of the first mistakes, I guess, that you could make would be to think of a transition from waterfall to agile as being simply a process change, simply a change from one set of processes and practices to another set of processes and practices. Actually, it's much more about culture, it's much more about behavior. You'll find that traditional organizations and traditional projects feel that you can plan everything in advance and up front. You can act with a degree of certainty and knowledge. Agile organizations believe that that's not really possible. It's very hard. You need to get going and learn and adapt as you go. Traditional organizations can be quite top-down, managerial. Management makes decisions, workers do. Agile organizations believe that a culture of empowerment and local decision making is much more effective. Traditional organizations think that change, and traditional projects think that change is something that needs to be controlled and managed and is a bad thing. Agile projects believe that change is inevitable and actually often quite a good thing, because it means you're more likely to get what you need. So for all those reasons and a whole bunch more, there's actually a kind of a shift in behavior, a shift in ways of thinking that's needed to adopt Agile. So it's really important that you recognize that it's that behavioral, cultural shift that you're trying to achieve, as well as just a process change. So how do you start? Well, you can transition to Agile as a big bang if you want to. That has been done and can be successful. I tend to think that partly because of the cultural shift aspect, a move, particularly for large organizations, in one wholesale step probably isn't a good thing. We tend to propose that you start with a pilot project, and that's something that we think is a good way to start, a good way to learn, a good way to find your feet. The pilot project should be important enough that it's not something that is going to have people aren't going to engage with, and people will be pulled off, and at the first sign of trouble the whole thing dissipates and nothing happens. It needs to be important enough that you're keen to see it through and actually keen to see this thing through to delivery. It's probably not a good idea for the pilot to be the most critical project that you've got within the organization, because this is all going to be quite new to you, and you want to take the opportunity to learn and discover. And if it's the most critical thing you're doing, you might find that the extra pressure from that criticality has a negative effect on the project. So what are some of the things that are really important for that pilot? Well, I think one thing is it's important to get a team of people who are keen to do Agile. And one of the most toxic things you can have is where there's a member of the team who's very skeptical, doesn't really want to do it. They're doing it because they've been told to. And having that within a team who themselves aren't certain and for whom it is all new anyway, can have a very negative effect. So if you have a team in mind, but there are some people in the team that aren't a great fit, it's probably worth reshaping that team slightly. It's also, I think, quite important for the team to be co-located to start with. So it is possible to do distributed Agile, that can be done, and we do it and have seen it done very successfully, but it is hard, and it's hard even for people who have got quite a lot of Agile experience. So I think if you're just starting out, having a local team, everyone in the same place is very important. Agile projects tend to have very, very high bandwidth communications, lots of activity and action on a very fast-paced, ongoing basis. So having people in the same place who can talk and draw and write and share is very, very important. And give the teams a good space. So make sure there's enough room, there's enough wall space. Make sure there are enough desks for, maybe there's some part-time team members or business representatives that want to come and sit with the team. Make sure it's an inviting place for people to come and co-locate and sit. I think the next thing is, and this is really critical, is business engagement. Sometimes you'll find that a technology team within the organization wants to try Agile, but they don't really have the appetite to talk to the business about it, maybe talk to some product teams that they have to work with. That very rarely goes well. The pace and rhythm of an agile project is very, very different to the pace and rhythm of a waterfall project. The amount of engagement you need from business stakeholders is much more continuous and constant and regular in an agile project. So it's really important to get that business engagement up front, and it's important when you're choosing your pilot project that you have that in mind and that you're doing it in a product area or a service area where there is somebody that can be a single, what we call product owner, who has a vision for the product, has a maybe in charge of budget, who can make decisions, priority calls about how this product's going to evolve, and who's got the time to work in a continual basis with the team, ideally co-located with the team for a reasonable amount of time. If the best person in the business to do that just doesn't have the time for it, then they need to have someone that they trust and who they've got a good relationship with that they can delegate that to, who is then able to have delegated responsibility for decision making. So that business engagement is really critical. I tend to think that the product owner is actually one of the most key roles in a successful agile project. And you can have the best team in the world, but if the business isn't engaged in the right way to the right degree, then you're going to have some trouble. The next thing I wanted to talk about is empowerment. It's very, very easy to say that you're going to start doing agile and to go through the standard meetings and stand-ups and using the agile artifacts, but not really deal with some of the policies and practices and things that slow you down in general day-to-day delivery. One of the really key principles of Agile is that the team is empowered, motivated, able to make local decisions about what the team needs to do to work effectively. And quite often in organizations that are used to operating in a waterfall way, people haven't historically felt empowered, haven't historically been empowered. It's important to try and inject that sense of, I have the ability to make some decisions here along with my team members into that team. And so one of the key things then is if there are certain things the team wants to do, if there are certain standard company policies or governance gates or ways of working, or there are other teams that they need to interact with, but that's difficult, to really try very, very hard to support the team and help the team recognize that there's something that they need and there's some decisions that they want to make and help and allow them to do that. If all you simply do is say, do Agile, but you've still got to just work within all the constraints that usually exist, then it's probably not a recipe for success. One of the worst things you can hear in a new Agile implementation is just a constant mantra of, that's just how it is, that's just how it is, we can't do anything about that, we can't do anything about that. Because it's a pilot project that you're running, you've got the opportunity to try and do things a little bit differently, and if you possibly can, even though in the wider organization there are still policies and practices and procedures that need to be followed in general, if for this pilot project you can suspend or relax some of those, you'll be in a better place to see true agility. I wanted to talk about training a little bit. I think everybody who starts on the pilot team should have training. I think there are various short agile training courses that you can run and have people do for you. To get a kind of a basic understanding of Agile is relatively straightforward. It's not complex, there's not a lot to it, but to do it well and to understand how you work your way through all the pitfalls and the nuances of particular complex situations, that needs experience. And when you hit difficulties on an Agile project, which you will early on, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, it's really valuable to have somebody who's got the experience of having done these things before, who can take a leadership role and actually help you through these. So I would always advocate, if you have someone in the organization who can take a Scrum Master role or a coaching role, they should be involved. If you don't, I would say maybe getting an external part-time coach or hiring someone in is a really valuable thing to do. And not just from a process perspective, there are technical practices, things like maybe pair programming or test-driven development or test automation and continuous integration. These are things that Agile teams or good Agile teams will bake into their ways of technically working. If you can get a technologist who knows how to do these things in right from the start, then you can embed them into your technology, into your product right at the start. Always much easier to do this at the start than later on. And then you'll get much better productivity and that very tight iterative cycle that you have with Agile is supported very well by these technical practices. So both from a process perspective and from a technical perspective, if you can get prior experience into the team, that's a really valuable thing. I wanted to talk quickly about one thing that's quite common, which is waterfall organizations have lots of project managers. It's very common to say, okay, well, we've got an Agile project we want to run, we've got a project manager, let's just make them Scrum Master for this project. And that's very common, that's fine to do, but it's important to recognize that the characteristics of a really good Scrum Master and the behaviors and the attitudes are different to what you might find with quite a lot of traditional project managers. So you might find some traditional project managers who are quite managerial, quite controlling, don't tend to tell people what to do rather than support people, very interested in plans, very reluctant to see change happen. A good Scrum Master will be someone who can take the team on a journey to improve their agility, but is also supportive of self-organizing teams who can make local decisions, respects the team and the knowledge that the team has and the professional skills that the team has to be able to make their own decisions. And so if you're going to have a project manager act as Scrum Master, make sure you pick somebody who's the right set of characteristics, get them good training, and then make sure also, if you can, to get some coaching to support that. I want to talk a bit about improvement and adaptation. It would be a mistake to view a transition to Agile as we have one set of very detailed practices that we've got right now, and we're going to transition to another set of very mandatory, specific, detailed practices in the future. Really good Agile organizations have a framework for how they work, they have an ethos, they have principles they work to, but they don't have a absolutely mandated, everybody has to do things exactly the same way. So you should view this as a journey that you're going on. There are always things that you can tailor to specific circumstances. There are always ways to improve. And as I say, it's a journey, it's not a destination. Even very, very successful, very long established Agile organizations still have processes in place to constantly inspect, adapt, improve, and that's something that should be baked in. From a pilot team perspective, what that means early on is that you should have retrospectives after every sprint. Quite often when things start to get difficult, then that goes out the window. It's really important not to let that happen. Maybe a traditional project wash up, you might think that that's an analogy. I tend to think traditional project wash ups are not particularly valuable. For a start, they happen at the end of the project, so it's too late to use any of the learning from it on the project. And also at the end of a project, the team might disband. It might be a while before the next project starts. Oftentimes you'll write a learnings document, but nothing happens with it. An Agile retrospective, you have them regularly, you have them during the project, not at the end. You're talking about things that are important and matter to delivery right now. And it's really important to get tangible actions that will be acted upon. It's part of the role of the Scrum Master to make sure that you do act. And one of the best ways to move from a kind of a reasonable Agile implementation to a good, strong one is to make sure that any actions that the team is proposing in these retrospectives that relate to other parts of the organization or how the team's interacting with people that are outside of the team get taken very seriously. So it's back to that. That's just how it is. There's nothing we can do about that. Try very, very hard not to do that, particularly on the pilot. There's plenty of time later on to worry about how these things can be rolled out more widely in the organization. But if there are ways in the pilot to take what the team's saying seriously and act on it, then it's very valuable. The team will be more productive, and they'll also see good value from the retrospectives because things are actually happening. It's tangible action being taken. I wanted to talk briefly about after the pilot. So if hopefully you've had a successful pilot, or at least it's been successful enough that you feel that you want to continue with Agile adoption, you might run another Agile project. You might choose to roll it out to multiple teams, and you might choose to do a full transition across parts of or the whole of the organization. A couple of thoughts on that. One is you've got a team of people who've got some good experience now, so you should use that. And if you're now running with multiple teams, you want to make sure you seed those teams with people who've got experience from the first team. So don't just keep the first team as it is and let the new teams figure it out for themselves. Seed experience across some of the new teams. The second thing is, as you roll it out more widely, there's a nettle that you're going to have to grasp, which is some of the things that during the pilot you chose to work around or ignore or relax. As it gets to a more organization level, the things that you're actually going to have to address and deal with. So governance practices, policies, portfolio management, even things like job roles will change. There might be certain roles that no longer exist or that change significantly, or new roles that are needed within the organization. These can be quite challenging. There's no real one-size-fits-all approach to this, but we always suggest that at some point during the pilot, an agile group is set up within the organization to look at how rollout is going to evolve, make sure there's relatively senior representation from all the parts of the business that are involved in delivery, all parts of technology and parts of other business areas, and make sure that group's working in an agile way. So don't create a 6 or 12-month plan with fixed milestones. Figure out what the early things are, things that you need to do over the next weeks or few weeks or a month. What are the most important things? Do those things, reflect on those things, adapt, and move forward. And I think the final thing I was going to mention was just a couple of thoughts on agile skeptics and maybe senior managers within the organization who are not keen on agile. Maybe they've got some fears or they've heard bad things about it. Quite often you'll hear that agile is there's no control, or there's no documentation, anything can change anytime. Some of those concerns can be alleviated just by talking about actually what agile is in practice. It's actually, to a large degree, got a lot more control because you're working through these very, very tight iterations, and the whole life cycle has to be followed each and every time. There isn't a lot of opportunity to punt stuff into the long grass. Things actually have to be done. You get a good sense of delivery there. One of the key things for me is the risk profile. So I think, particularly for senior management, it's good to talk about the risk profile. In a traditional project, huge amounts of risk are shifted to the back end. There's no real tangible actual work in software until very late. User acceptance happens very late. Lots and lots of things happen 80-90% of the way through the project where huge problems could come through. In an agile project, it's flat. So right at the start, you're delivering working software. The business is involved constantly throughout. And so you're in a position where, in a sense, actually, in an agile project, it feels like, for a new agile team, they might feel like it's going badly to start with. Often I would hear, this agile project's got a whole bunch of problems. Most of our other projects don't have problems this early. But that's actually a good thing. It's not that there are projects that don't exist on these other problems that don't exist on these other projects. It's just that on the other projects, you don't find out about them until much later on. On the agile project, it's smoothed out. You'll find many of the problems earlier on, and you're in a position to be able to adapt and deal with those. And in the worst case, if you actually have to can the project, you're canning the project having spent 10% of the budget rather than 90% of the budget. So you've got A, time, and B, money to do something different and take a different direction. So that risk profile, I think, is quite important. The other thing is, I find that traditional projects focus a bit less on the actual product or service you're delivering and a bit more on the project itself than is valuable. So you quite often would find a project regarding itself as having been successful because it delivered what we said we were going to do. We did what we said we were going to do in time and to budget. The chances of what we said we were going to do being what we really need, being what's actually best for the business and the product, with all the time that's passed and the learning and the changing business circumstances, are not that high. But you will sometimes, and I think quite often, find that the project itself takes on a level of importance that shouldn't be there. In an agile project, the focus is absolutely entirely and always on the actual product itself. What's the next thing that we need to do, given the knowledge and information that we have right now, in order to make this thing better and deliver good value to the business. And I think the final thing is, and that I'd like to say, is that showing rather than telling is a really powerful tool. So if you've got people who've got concerns, and just talking to them about it will get you so far, but actually showing them success is much better. So the pilot itself is a good way to show success. If you manage to run a pilot, you can use that to demonstrate that. But even better, and right from the start, it can be very valuable to find another organization that's maybe a similar size, scale, complexity to yours, that's been through an Agile implementation that you can go and talk to, go and visit, get them to come visit you, bring the skeptics along. It's a very, very powerful message if you've got someone who's not sure, to have someone say to them, I understand what you're talking about. I know exactly why you're concerned. I had the exact same concerns. Here's our story. This is what we did. Here's how we dealt with that. And here are some other thoughts and tips. And it can be very valuable as well, even for people who are not Agile skeptics, just to speak with people who've been through this before and who they can learn from. And you tend to find that organizations that have been through a successful Agile transition, there's a bit of buzz about them, and they're actually very keen to talk. So it's talk and share. So it's not as hard as you might think to find these organizations. So definitely something I would do. So I think that's everything I wanted to say. And we've probably got a few minutes for some questions if we have any. Hopefully that was valuable for you.
Hi there, it's Andy here from Kentucky. I have a question for you. You talked about turning project managers into Scrum Masters. What about turning project managers into product owners?
From to send through. Any questions that you do have that you think about after now, tweet us. We'll pick those questions up and get them to back.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Ah, right. There was a question.
Hello.
Hello.
Oh, hi. Right, so you can hear me. Hi, it's Andy from Kentucky here.
Hiya.
You mentioned about turning project managers into Scrum Masters.
Yeah.
We're actually thinking about turning project managers into product owners. Do you have any thoughts and comments on that?
I think it's similar in the sense that.
Oh, and just.
Can you hear me okay?
Just to be aware, these project managers are sat listening to this as well.
That's totally okay. I guess I would make a similar comment, which is that they're not exactly the same role. And so it's not automatic that someone who's good at one would be good at the other. And so I think the attributes of a good product owner is someone who's genuinely passionate about the product, has an understanding of it, is able to make decisions about it, and will own the product and actually take an interest in the product and own it and set the direction for it. If you've got project managers who've got those attributes, then that's a perfectly good thing to do. But I would just simply say that I don't see Scrum Master and Project Manager and Product Owner as being identical, and therefore you'll find some people that are good at one and not the other. But it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. I've seen that done in the past and seen it work.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? No? Oh, question about audit. Question from Susanna. I find that our tech part is far more anti-agile than the product owners. We are audited by internal audit. Any hints? So you're saying that the technology group isn't keen to be agile, but the product group is keen to be agile? Is that the... Okay. That's a slightly unusual way around. I mean, so one approach might be, is it the case that it's the whole of technology? Sometimes you find that it's the management within a group who are not keen on something, and actually you'll find pockets of people within there who are. So if it's a large technology group, you might find that there's opportunity to work with certain parts of it in an agile way. I have found, as I say, that there are quite often people who feel that their role is at risk because what they do doesn't really fit into an agile organization. So if you can find pockets of people who are keen, then that would be good. There's always, I mean, what I tend to find happens in this kind of scenario is that the business just goes to someone external who's willing to be agile. So if they're keen to operate in a certain way and technology is not keen to go with them, then they look elsewhere. Or at least have the threat to look elsewhere, which might kick them into that. But yeah, I think, I mean, yeah. Okay. I was just going to say, I think getting them to explain what their concerns are is a good start, right? So a general reluctance to do something is very hard to work with. If they've got some specific concerns, then there may be certain actions that you can take based on what it is they're worried about. Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you Oh, there's another question come through. I think we're out of time, so what I'll do is I'll take that question and we'll get back in touch